good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Growth and Greatness podcast. I am your host, Candice Lambe. What's up, y'all? I'm so excited to be coming to you all again tonight. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Growth and Greatness podcast is a show where I have the privilege of speaking to leaders all over the globe who have learned the secrets of success in business, in wealth, in health, and in faith. And I'm so excited to be able to share these conversations with you. For those of you who don't know, this podcast is available on all podcast platforms, as well as Facebook and YouTube. So if you have enjoyed the content so far, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. Thank you. On tonight's episode, we are discussing 5 ways to improve your mental health. Now, mental health is a prevalent topic these days. It is broad and it is far-reaching in its scope. So we understand that we're not going to be able to explore the fullness of its complexities and nuances in a single conversation. However, our goal tonight is to give you a few tools to help you take the desired steps in your own life to achieve a healthier, happier version of yourself. So I can't wait. Please note, this content is not meant to take the place of your physician. So with that being said, let's get started. I heard somebody recently say that note takers are money makers, and it stuck with me. So if you are really serious about making some changes in your life, don't just listen to this. I encourage you to grab a notepad or a journal and mine the gems that are relevant for your life right now. Note-taking enables you to retain the information long enough to be transformed by it. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest for tonight, Dr. Sharon Apopa. Dr. Apopa is an executive and a clinical social worker with 30 years of experience in the field of mental health. Not only mental health, but really transformational change in the field of mental health, transformational change in individuals, families, and organizations. She has extensive experience with coaching, development, empowerment, and enrichment in corporate, community, and spiritual spaces. So please help me welcome Dr. Sharon Apopa. Woo, woo, woo.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Pastor P.
Good evening to you. It is. We are thrilled to have you tonight. How are you?
I am full of anticipation and just really enjoying hanging out with you this evening.
Good. Well, listen, I know that our conversation tonight is going to be so good. So I don't want to keep the people waiting. So we are going to jump right into it. Dr. Apopa, as a qualified professional, why do you think that the conversation of mental health has made its way to the forefront of so many conversations today?
Well, Pastor C, I think that there have been several impactful occurrences in our community worldwide that have brought the topic of mental health to the forefront. As I start to reflect, I start out with the Me Too movement that came out several years ago, and that start to destigmatize the whole issue of disclosing issues of sexual abuse. And of course, sexual abuse is one of those major stresses that contribute to our mental health. So I think that when people started destigmatizing the fact of disclosing about your sexual abuse, it also empowered people who had other crises that had been, what should I say, they have been muted, their voices have been muted to discuss. There had been no and no in the community, then people became empowered to talk about that. So we had people coming out about depression. We had people coming out about domestic violence. And I think all of those occurrences help to prepare the platform for us to have open and honest discussions around issues of mental health.
That is really interesting that you say that. I think a lot of times um, we have taken note, and I say we because this is a conversation that I've had with a few others, just about the differences in the generations, right? So I was born in the hip hop generation, and with the hip hop generation came, we're telling our stories. So a lot of our life experiences showed up in our music. They showed up in other artistic expressions. And I think it really changed the way that we began to talk about things. Because things weren't so hush hush. I mean, I also grew up in a time where I was on the heels of what happens in this house stays in this house, but it didn't really
Exactly.
stick as much when we started hearing everybody tell their story to a beat. So that's really interesting, that you say that. Um,
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I think that the whole issue of taboo um, has is almost now in our current society where everything is reality shows, reality that everybody's talking about keeping it 100 and things like that. And so while those
Right.
things may be colloquialism or things that are deemed to be associated with young people, I think it's empowering everybody, regardless of
Right.
what age you are. It's empowering all of us to feel, to say, okay, let's talk about the things that I've never talked about before.
So true. So true. Um, when you think about mental health as a professional, what questions do you think that people should be asking that maybe they're not asking about mental health, or things that they should be thinking about that maybe haven't really come to the surface of the conversation just yet?
Okay, so I think that when we think about mental health, we tend to think of it in isolation. We don't ask ourselves like what are the contributing factors, or what are the biological, what are the genetic factors. We tend to look at it in isolation as just an individual problem. So one of the things I think that we should be talking about is how can I be informed by my biology, how can I be informed by my life experiences to understand what causes me to be have risk factors for mental illness? Because when we can ask that and get an answer to that, then we can go on a journey of prevention and intervention. So it's really understanding like the beginnings of it, the causation of it, what really causes it, and are there populations of people that are excluded, or what can change in the dynamics of my situation at any given point in time that might increase my risk factors for mental illness. Because we don't really think that. We think it's a certain population, but it's a dynamic. It's a
Yeah.
yin and a yang. It's a component of how much stress, how much less stress, how much coping. It's all those things. And so, what are the real components, and how do I keep those things in balance to decrease my risk? And I say decrease my risk because there are some things like biology and things like that that may predispose us that we cannot change, but we can decrease the risk. You know.
That's an interesting concept when you talk about the difference between prevention and intervention, because I think a lot of times people don't think about mental health until it's a problem.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I mean, I'm only thinking about myself. Like I'm not walking around thinking like, let me preserve my mental health. Most times I don't think about it until I'm stressed, until I feel like I need a break. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So even being able to build in healthy habits to
Yes.
maintain a healthy mental health is something that is super valuable, and which is why I'm glad that we're having the conversation tonight. So
Yeah.
for those of you again who are just chiming in, our topic tonight is 5 ways to improve your mental health. So before we list the five and get into that, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Apopa, what are some telltale signs of deteriorating mental health that we wouldn't readily recognize?
Okay. So, one of the things that is our loss of interest in things that we enjoy doing.
Okay.
Um, and so, um, we tend to we are good at rationalizing. So we, maybe we enjoy going out with our friends and things like that there. And say an incident happens, somebody talks about you or something, and you don't go out, and you might say, "I'm not going out next week because I don't want to be around so and so." 3 weeks later, you're still in the house, and you're saying, you know, now you're not going out with Jane anymore. If Sally asks you, but you're still saying, "Oh no, I think I'm gonna stay in." So when we tend to when we get really stressed out and we lose it, sometimes we tend to isolate ourselves. So when we see that we're losing interest in doing the things that we usually find pleasurable and all, we need to stop and think, okay, what's going on here? You know, and most times we are not self-aware enough sometimes to dig right down to take a deeper look, so we keep it on the surface, and sometimes we uh try to ignore it because we know that Aunt Jane was peculiar and spent her days at MWI, or we know some of the family history, and so we suppress when we see those signs coming. But
Yeah.
definitely losing interest in doing things that you find pleasurable is should be a warning sign to check out what's going on.
That's
That's
really
one thing.
interesting that you say
You
that,
know,
because I think when we start talking about losing interest, and you guys, I want you to chime in the comments about this, because I hope I'm not the only one. But I think that sometimes when we experience disappointment or frustration within the context of our relationships, and like you said, we want to isolate. As we're talking about mental health, we're saying, hey, this is a sign that your mental state is going in a direction that's not healthy. But I think the reason why we don't always give credit to that is because we feel like we are controlling it, right? Not like something's happening to us. Well, I'm making the decision to stay home.
yeah.
I'm making the decision to, disassociate myself with that crowd. I'm making the decision. And because it feels like I'm in control, it doesn't feel like anything is happening to me. Can anybody else relate to that? If so, type, put it in the comments like, yes, girl, that's me. Yes, girl.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it's really important because what happens when we isolate ourselves? So when we're in relationship, and I was so excited last week, I must tell you, that podcast was on money. I think it was a really good start because relationships really are the underpinnings of a lot of things that affect us, rather with the quality of the relationship, I should say. So when we're in relationship, we get affirmations, we get pleasure from giving and helping others, and all of those things are important for maintaining our mental health. We get perspective. So sometimes, when we're in relationship with people, we may think, oh, this glass is half empty, and somebody else comes along and says the glass is half full. So where we were starting to get down and depressed because we thought it was half empty, that fresh perspective which we get from being in relationship lifts and elevates our mood. But when you isolate yourself, the reason why it's a sign, it's something that you would want to look at for your mental health, because when you isolate, the only person you're talking to is you, and God forbid when you start answering yourself. You know what I mean? So and so that you're getting that negative perspective, and then that's the only perspective you see. And we know that our perception of a situation affects how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. So that's why it's important not to isolate ourselves, to be able to get somebody to bounce off, or someone to encourage us and things like that, and build us up when we're going down. So isolating ourselves is definitely a precursor. It's not a clinical sign, I would say, but it's a precursor to having a decline in our mental health.
That is so good. That's so good. And I love that you made the point that when we're isolating ourselves, the only person that we're talking to is ourselves. Because I
Yeah.
think that that applies to such a broader scope within our lives. It's the same, you know what I mean? It's a continuation of the conversation about relationships that we had last week. When we don't have quality relationships, when we don't have other people that we are in communication with, regularly, we really don't have the opportunity to have new perspectives to change our own perspective. And so if our perspective is not if it's not healthy, if it's not accurate, if it's not broad, if it's super narrow, then we just keep rehearsing the same things. We just keep and nothing new can come from old thoughts. Nothing new can come from just the rehearsing of the same old, same old. So that is why those relationships are so, so valuable. And again, towards mental health, that is why it's so good that you don't isolate yourself. So, Dr. Apopa, what's something else? What's another telltale sign that you'd say?
Okay. Another telltale sign is an inability to perform what we call the task of daily living. The inability to do those things that we really do on a daily basis. Take care of ourselves. So, you get up and you're like, I don't feel like curling my hair today. And we all had that one day. But when you see this as a constant theme and your hair is getting matted and, no detangler can deal with it, that, you're going to start saying, what's going on with me? Or, when you get up one day and you say, I don't feel like taking a bath, and but now you're stinking and everybody's moving off the bus when you get on. So when you start having an inability and that deterioration, and you know that you were on top of your game and you never went out with your dress and your shoes not matching, and now everything's falling apart. That's a telltale sign something is going on. When you used to be a highly structured person, and now you're totally disorganized. You can meet your deadlines at work. You're having poor concentration, poor ability to focus. When those things are going on, it's a sign that your mental health is being affected by something.
I
You know.
one of the things that you mentioned while we were preparing that I thought was so important to note is that these types of things, these symptoms, don't just we don't just go from zero to hero. We don't go from one day we're on top of it and the next day we're under a rug. But
Absolutely. They're
they are
progressive.
gradual. They're progressive.
Yes.
And so again, I just want to encourage people, who are experiencing those stressors and challenges in life. Like, you may not be at a place where it's critical mass, but it is helpful to take note of these things and ask yourself, really, like, take inventory, take stock of what's going on in your heart and your mind. Like, am I losing interest? Am I like, these people are going to get whatever I give them today? These
And,
clothes
and,
gonna
and
be here 3 weeks later.
Absolutely, and it's important. I like that you brought up for us to talk about the issue of it being progressive, because intensity and severity has to be measured on an individual basis. We tend to like to compare ourselves to others. So we say, well, I'm not looking as bad as so and so, or I'm not doing as badly as so and so. When we talk about your mental health, it's comparing yourself to yourself. How was my functioning before? How is my functioning now? Not whether I'm doing better than somebody else. So it's really important to be self-aware and take introspection as opposed to trying to measure ourselves against those around us, because um, our mental health and our mental functioning is very much individualized.
So sorry, I lost your audio. So I'm a little bit delayed. I
Okay,
think
do you hear me
I think
now?
you're absolutely right in what you're saying, Dr. Apopa. Give me just a moment here to get myself sorted. Let's see here. Okay. So, Dr. Apopa, let me ask you this other question here. Um, let's start by talking about the 5 steps that will help everybody improve their mental health. Um, I don't want to be, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, so I'm just going to let you run down the list while I sort myself out on this side.
Okay. So step number one that I think is critical is being intentional with dealing with the stress in our lives. Um, Stress is a part of our everyday, but there are different types of stress. And when we experience something called critical incident stress, which is when we have a specific event that impacts on our lives that we don't have the ability to cope with, uh, event where we sometimes feel threatened that by loss of life or physical threat to our bodies, when we have this type of critical incident stress, where we have what we call accumulative stress. And accumulative stress is where we have situations that occur over time that are factors that bother us, that impact on us emotionally and all, and we suppress them. And I like to compare this, Pastor C, to the issue, and you probably heard me talk about it before because it's like a trash bag. And all of us probably have, well, hopefully all of us have had some opportunity to take out the trash. And when we take out the trash, we go from room to room, we collect up everybody's trash, we put it in our trash bag, and when we're running out of space, we put our foot in the trash bag, we push down the trash, and we keep emptying more trash in there. Sometimes, when we're not cognizant of how much trash we're emptying, the bag bursts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens with our lives when we fail to deal with the stresses in our lives. When we allow the stress to build up, build up, build up, there comes a time when our bag bursts. And it doesn't always burst in terms of a psychiatric emergency, but sometimes it bursts with behavior. As remember, we said everything is progressive. So sometimes it starts bursting with inappropriate behavior. So we're overwhelmed with stress. We're not dealing with it. We're trying to ignore it. We're trying to put our head in the sand and all of that. And then we start showing out in other ways. We get irritable. We get, with people, we get short tempered. We have angry outbursts. When all these things start to happen, it's a telltale sign that something's going on inside of us that needs to be addressed that we're not handling.
Hmm.
So, being intentional about dealing with our stress. I have to tell our listeners today that unfortunately for us, when we close our eyes and we can't see things, they haven't gone away. They're still there to be dealt with. When we were children, we thought we closed our eyes and everything disappeared. And we're still trying to do that. But they're not going away. And it's having impacts on our mental health, impacts on our physical health, impact on our social relationships. So being intentional about dealing with our stress is one of the key things I think in helping to protect our mental health.
That is so good. That is so good. I think so often we are conditioned to avoid. We don't want to have hard conversations. We don't want to wrestle with those
Yes.
sad feelings. We don't want to wrestle with the anger. We don't want to wrestle with grief. And I use wrestle, but really like just sort through, sit in it. You know what I mean? Just deal with it. And so it's almost like we live our lives and we keep building these barricades to keep us from these undesired feelings, and the more life we live, the more those barricades keep kind of closing in on us because we just don't want to deal, when really there is so much value in gaining the skill sets to be able to deal. The more we learn, the more that we learn, then the more that we grow, we equip ourselves to be able to have hard conversations. We equip ourselves to be able to deal with tough things in our lives. And I'm telling you, the growing process, the learning process, it is not an easy process, but it makes the rest of your life so much easier because you're not trying to avoid all of these things. I mean, a rug can only hold so much dirt.
Exactly.
underneath.
Exactly.
Our minds can only hold so much trauma. And I've often heard it said that what the mind cannot hold, it imposes on the body. So where you may
That's true.
not be, you are experiencing mental health that you can't really sort through. Now all of a sudden you start having these physical ailments as well, and they feel phantom because you can't get to the bottom of it. But our bodies are so fearfully and wonderfully made that it's all connected.
It is exactly right. And one of the things that you touched on, you were talking about as we grow up in life and maintaining the skill sets. There's one skill set that very few of us can master very well, and but it would be excellent for helping us with stress, and that's learning how to deal with conflict. We are so conflict avoidant, and I believe as a culture, we have been ingrained. It's ingrained in us that conflict is bad,
Come on.
and we
Listen,
should
if that's you,
avoid
if
it
you
at
feel like you thought conflict was bad and you want to avoid it at all costs, I want somebody to put in
exactly.
the in the chat, it's me. It's me. I'm her. I'm she. I'm him. It's me.
Exactly. And so that skill set, if we could just learn that, I mean, I know we're going into prevention and solution now, but just learning conflict management helps to relieve your stress.
Yeah.
Because we know when our temples are bulging out and our blood pressure is rising and we're getting all of those biological responses that are saying ding ding ding, there's something going on they're uncomfortable with, you need to deal with it, and we're like, no, I'm not dealing with it, because we're so conflict avoidant. So we have a high blood pressure, we have an aneurysm, we have a stroke, we have all of these things that need not have happened if we just knew how to manage conflict. You
That
don't
is
do
so
anything
true.
else tonight. Run from this podcast and go and learn how to manage conflict.
That is a truth. I want to tell a little story about myself. I'm telling myself, right? So when I was in my early 20s, I hated conflict. I hated it, okay? And whenever I felt like, you know how you get into situations and you're just like something needs to be said, right? And I would physically feel my heart rate increase, my voice would shake, my hands would shake, and I'm just like, I know something needs to be said, right? And I would open my mouth to say it. And, for those of you who know me now, thank God for growth. Thank God for change. Okay. Because I would yell, my voice would be, 10 octaves higher than what it is. Right. And, I didn't know how, right? I didn't know how. And I'll say this too. When I began to deal with conflict, in the early stages, oftentimes it was too late. Like not too late, but it was well beyond when I probably should have had the conversation before, right? So I'm at critical mass. Now I can't take it no more. You done hit my last nerve, and that's about it. Right? So that's when I'm having this conversation about setting boundaries, or I'm having this conversation about conflict because I literally cannot take it anymore. And then I walked away from those conversations feeling like, was I even heard? Did I communicate what I wanted to communicate? And so then over time, and I thank God, and I also thank the relationships that I had at the time, I realized that having conflict resolution and conflict management is so valuable, because oftentimes when you become skilled at it, you are having those conversations before the conflict happens. You are
Exactly.
foreseeing that there may be conflict in the future. So we're just going to sort it out right now. Let me just tell you what it's going to be. And that way, you don't have to have those harder conversations, because it is tough having conversations when emotions are high, when you're super duper frustrated. Like, then you cannot always count on yourself to communicate as clearly as you would like. So half of the battle of having good conflict resolution is timing and having hard conversations in times of peace.
That's so good. I mean, that is really, really good. And Pastor Candice, when you were talking, do you know that you were describing, when you were talking about this conversation, some of the symptoms of anxiety? And anxiety is very much one of the most common mental health problems next to depression. And so when you're talking about having that tightness of chest, that heart palpitations, you know, feeling like you're about to have a heart attack, all those things were signs of anxiety.
I
And
had it.
anxiety is underpinned by fear. A fear, and in times of conflict, it's like a fear of a bad outcome. It'd be interesting if people would just put a thumbs up or something. How many times have you had that experience where your chest is thumping and you're sweating and it feels like you're gonna pass out because of a situation when it's really driven by unnatural, unreally documented fear of something that once you confront it, it doesn't even happen the way you thought it was.
That's true.
you know so so I really want to encourage people again to get that skill of conflict resolution as a means of protecting your mental health.
So good. So good.
so
So good.
So we talked about, managing your stress. We talked a bit before, so I won't go back into too much, but maintaining healthy relationships. But that came up earlier, and we talked about the benefits of maintaining healthy relationships and what we can get it from in terms of keeping our minds mentally well. Um, Increase self awareness. I really have to pause at this one because again, we started out with the whole issue of stress, right? And when we become really aware of ourselves, like what are our hot buttons? What are the things that really push us over the edge? Um, some more being self-aware. What is it my family history that predisposes me to things? Becoming self-aware. What are my blind spots? What are the things that I don't really see about myself that could have been impacting on my relationships, impacting on my coping skills? Because there's a little theory that I like to use all the time when we're talking about mental health, and it's a theory by a man named Kaplan, and he said that if you have these three things in balance all the time, your risk of becoming mentally unhealthy, unwell, will be drastically decreased. And he said, if you have good coping skills, if you have a realistic perception of the life and situations that are being affecting you, and if you have good supports. If you keep those three things in balance, he said, the chances of having psychiatric episodes or mental illness in your life is greatly, greatly reduced. And I love to share that with people because they're very practical things. Three practical things that we can do, but we have to be self-aware. What type of person am I? Am I a pessimist? Do I always see the bad side of things? And if that's who I am, how can I work on shifting that? So I start to see my glass half full. You know, um, am I the type of person that likes to beat the drum? You started to talk about that earlier. And beating the drum is a little euphemism that one of my friends coined. And she said that beating the drum is when you hear the person talks about the same negative situation over and over and over and over without understanding that every time you talk about the negativity, you're reliving the negative experience.
And
You're
everybody else is too that
re-traumatizing
has to listen to it.
yourself. So beating the drum, are we the type of people that like to beat the drum? And how do we stop beating the drum and start shifting our perspective and talking from a more healthier point? Our coping skills, how do we cope with life? um, a lot of persons who have stresses in life and cope with things like substance using illicit substances and alcohol and things like that also predispose themselves to issues of mental health. So how do I cope? And is my coping skills effective for the situations that I'm dealing with? Sometimes our coping skills can be fine for little things, but as we progress, as life, we have critical incidents that we need to look at how to expand my toolbox.
Oh,
And then relationships. You talked about relationships last week, and the gentleman, I think he talked about two different types of relationships. Uh, and so when you're in crisis, when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling your mental health is under threat, you have to look at what kind of relationships do I have? Who's my go-to people? Are they effective with the things that I'm dealing with now? You know, do I need a professional for this? So, looking at becoming self-aware, and we know from a business perspective, or, when we do SWOT analysis on organizations and things like that, we need to do SWOT analysis on ourselves. What are the things about me that are a threat to my mental health? What behaviors do I engage in that are a threat? What are my opportunities right here and now tonight as I'm listening to this podcast? What opportunities do I have right now to improve my mental health?
Dr. Popa, you just dropped so many great points. I want to touch on one of the things that you said earlier about being self aware, because being self aware requires balance. It requires being able to look at yourself objectively. Last week, we
Yes.
talked about it. In the context of our relationships, so many times we look at life through the lens of what's happening to us.
Yes.
So, and it's a slight thing, but I think a lot of times we are probably more self-absorbed than we are self-aware. Self-absorbed is like, they did this to me. They don't want me to be great. Look at how life is just doing me wrong. You know what I mean? Versus me looking at myself objectively and saying, hey, this is where I'm doing pretty good, but these are also the areas that I need to grow. And it's nobody else's fault but my own. It's nobody else's problem but my own. And I'm taking ownership of the good, and I'm also taking ownership of the opportunities. And so those are questions that we have to ask ourselves. And I love that you said this, because when we are not self-aware, when we are more self-absorbed than we are self-aware, our expectations of life are not real. They're not real.
Exactly.
Okay? When I'm walking through life thinking that so many things are about me, that everything is tied up and it's surrounding me, like your expectations about life and the way that things operate, they just not real. Okay? I think about people who are like, oh, look at them. They didn't speak to me. Look at them. She rolled her eyes at me. Look at them. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And I'm like, you really don't think that people have other things going on in their mind besides you? Like, everybody is not thinking about you. Odds are everybody is thinking more about themselves than they're thinking about you.
Well,
That's
Pastor C, it's interesting because remember when we were talking in preparation, we were talking about this whole buzzword now. Everybody's diagnosing everybody else as being narcissistic, but nobody's looking in the mirror.
hi, hello. Michael Jackson said it best. Start there.
Exactly. Nobody's looking in the mirror. And you find that we have a very individualistic society right now where we have so many messages sent through all sorts of mediums that is all about you.
It's true.
And so we tend to look at only 50% of who we really are. Because when we talk about self awareness, we talk about four aspects of the self that we need to check out to get balance. And like you said, it's all about balance. So it's about the open self, it's about the blind self. We can't understand the blind self. It's a blind area in all of us, things that we don't see about ourselves that are there that are impacting on our life. And so the only way to see your blind self is to be in relationship.
Oh, the
So,
only way to
you know,
see
and then
the only way to be informed about your blind self is to be in
self.
relationships. You guys, just let that marinate for a second, because that means that the relationship has got to be able to speak to the parts of you that you don't see. And sometimes we're in relationships, but those relationships bet not tell me something about myself that I do not see. No, thank you. No, thank you.
And think about, I mean, Pastor C, I know we're going off a little bit, but think about it. When you're in a car and there's a blind spot in the car, what do you do to say to the passenger? Can you check and see what's coming?
Yes.
And without that, you increase your risk to crash with somebody else. And the
True.
same with our mental health. When we don't have a give others the opportunity to speak into our lives and expose to us the blind spots in our lives, we increase our risk of crashing.
Mm-hmm. It is so, so true. So true. And I think a lot of times the reason why we don't open up ourselves to our relationships so that people can speak to the blind self is because we're not sure that the people we're in relationships are really trustworthy and safe places for them to be able to do that. Am I talking right? Are we talking right? Somebody put it in the chat if this is resonating. This is so good to me tonight.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's that brings up the whole issue, which is still not in where we're supposed to be, but where we are. It's the whole issue of the impact of trauma on mental health. Because we talk about something called post trauma, post traumatic stress disorder, which is the way that we affect that a trauma affects us after the situation has occurred. So post trauma, after the trauma, the stress that remains impacts on us, and a big part of post PTSD is the triggers, things that take us back, things that unlock those memories in our mind that we would rather not deal with. And when those memories are unlocked, they flood us back with all the emotion and sensations and everything as if we were just being traumatized again. And so one of the big triggers I think that have traumatized a lot of people is broken trust. And so because of that broken trust, anytime and hurt, when they get into relationships where it is safe, immediately they feel vulnerable. That trigger goes off. Bing, bing, bing. I better not say anything. I better not ask them what you think. So you've been up all night. You're not been sleeping. It's a sign, and you're having insomnia, which is a sign of stress and a precursor to mental illness. You can't sleep and all this stuff, and you're scared to ask anybody because the last time you opened yourself and shared something with somebody, they used it against you. So, I really want to encourage people today to take that leap again. Try to trust again. If you try to find somebody again who, when you're having struggles, when you're having signs and systems, instead of isolating and talking to yourself and only having your perspective, I dare you to trust again as a preventative factor in becoming mentally unwell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to go back, because I think that sometimes we withdraw from people as if going into isolation is the solution to broken trust. But what we identified earlier is that going into isolation is not better than dealing with broken trust because you're still not moving forward in a healthy way. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is our next
The
step?
number four.
Yes.
Number four is making a spiritual connection. And I really want to, I use that word intentionally. I did not say making a religious connection. I did not say going to, a church and finding creed and all, but making a spiritual connection. Why am I saying that? We are all tripartite. We have body, we have soul, and we have spirit. We're so good at taking care of the body. We exercise, we run, we do all sorts of calisthenics to make our body look good, right? We take care of our soul, our mind, our will, our emotion. We study, we look at movies and things that like we do, but we don't take care of our spirit. And it's when we get into critical incident stress, accumulative stress, post traumatic stress, all these things that are precursors to mental health, when we get to those crucial points where we're looking for hope in a hopeless situation, all that we fed to our body, all that we fed to our soul is not enough to sustain us. And the only way we can be sustained in times of critical crisis, when everything around us, when our coping skills and everything in our house is failing, is to be able to get hope in something that's exterior to ourselves. But you can't build that type of relationship and spirituality in times of crisis. So, as a preventative factor, as a factor, a protective factor, I encourage people to start to build, to feed their spirit, start to build inside themselves a relationship with God or whatever they call it that gives them hope in times of hopelessness. That gives them the capacity to see beyond themselves. A lot of times when people commit suicide, it's because they were hopeless. It wasn't because they were poor. It wasn't because they, didn't have a lot of people around them. Actually, I was preparing for this and looking at the number of um, church leaders, the number of movie stars, and things like that that have committed suicide. They had money, they had fame, they had all sorts of people around them, but they had no hope. So,
And I
without feeding that,
I want to touch on that because I know a lot of times we talk about, a lot of times when I think about hope, I automatically connect it to my faith. But I do want to just kind of break it down a little bit. When we're talking about hope, we're really talking about options. When a person reaches a point in
yes.
their life where they feel like they do not have any other options, that is when they make severe steps. They take severe steps. And part of the options that we have in life are connected to our connections. So within ourselves as individuals, we have a finite number of options. But when we are connected to a community, the number of options grow exponentially based on our community. And so that is
Yes.
another reason why isolation is so detrimental to us as people, is because no man is an island. We said this last week. No person is meant to do life on their own. You are not better off without relationships, because what it does is it reduces your options in life. And because we are not healthily connected within communities, we reach the end of ourselves too soon. We reach the end of our options too soon, not because they don't exist, but because we have been taught and conditioned that those options outside of ourselves are not as valuable as they are.
Oh, Pastor C, you're talking so good, and I know we don't have a lot of time left. So I've got to go to my fifth one, which is managing our thought life. Pastor C, I wish we had another hour for this because there is, I'm going to start with, for those who are faith based, I'm going to start with the scripture that says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Right? That's the faith based version. The psychologists say in CBT that what you think affects how you feel, affects how you behave. When we don't know how to manage our thought life, there's a big story, and I don't have time to think about it, but imagine it. There was a story in the Bible where they sent the people out and they said, we were as grasshoppers in our own eyes.
Yeah.
And so we were in grasshoppers in their eyes. When we don't have good thoughts about ourselves, when we don't have good self awareness, how we see and think about ourselves and see ourselves also affects how others see us. And
That
then
is
that
so
affects
good.
the
Somebody
quality
put
of
that in
our
the
life.
chat.
It affects the quality of our life and our life experiences. It impacts on the amount of stress in our lives, and it decreases or increases our risk for mental health issues. We have to learn how to channel our thought life. And
Absolutely.
there's a psychological technique that's called mindfulness. And it talks about learning how to live in the present, learning how to focus on the moment. That's what the psychologists say. But the Bible says, whatever things are good, whatever things are honest, whatever things are pure, whatever things are just, whatever things are good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. I want to tell you that whether you come from a psychological perspective or biblical or theological perspective, the message is the same. When we manage our thought life, we decrease our risk for unhealthy um, for negative impacts on our mental health.
I love I love that. I love that because I feel like the operative word in that statement is manage. And too
Yes.
often times we just take life as it comes. We let those waves just roll over us and we are just kind of rolling with the punches of life. But there is a space of ownership, there is a space of leadership that we have to take in our lives to be able to tame the lion of mental health, because stress is going to come at us. It's not going to
That's right.
stop, right? Hard days are going to come. The Bible says it like this: rain falls on the just and the unjust. Everybody's going to have bad days, but the question is, how well are you managing it? Everybody's going to have trying relationships, but how well are you managing it? It's not going to do us any good to hope for ideal situations every day, because we already know that hope is not ever going to come true. So we have got to be really good at managing things. Dr. Apopa, thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And I hear somebody saying, I don't hear them, but I hear them. So, how am I supposed to manage my thought life? One of the simplest ways I have found and encourage clients is to write affirmations to themselves. Write an affirmation, put it on your mirror, and hold on a minute, write an affirmation, put it on your mirror, and then say it to yourself each and every day: I am beautiful, I am worth it, I am more than enough. I can do all the things. Like, you write yourself affirmations and then you speak them, so that we learn through repetition as human beings. And sometimes from our childhoods, we've had so many negative things spoken. And so we have to erase the negative things by replacing them with positive thoughts. And you can do that through an affirmation.
Absolutely. And I love the practice of writing out affirmations, because we have had a theme tonight. There are so many things that we have got to do during times of peace, right? When we're
Yes.
feeling good, those are the days that we want to write out those affirmations, because on the day that you don't feel good, that's not the day to be trying to salvage and prevent negative mental health. Those are the days to reach for the life raft that you've already put to
Absolutely.
the side here
Absolutely.
for those days when you're going to have hard times. So during times of peace, the days that you're feeling super great about yourself, write out those affirmations, because they will come in handy. Don't wish away the bad days, prepare for the bad days, and you will
Yes.
win. You will win. Dr. Apopa, we are just about out of time. So thank you again so much. For those of you who have enjoyed this conversation tonight, please leave a thumbs up or a word of affirmation. We're already talking about it in the comments. Let us know what were some of the best parts of this. And just so that you know, this episode will be live on the podcast platforms this weekend. So you can listen to the audio version of this again. And I definitely recommend that you do so. Also, please go to my website, www.candicelambe.com, and there you will be able to get a free download. This is the free download that we offered last week, and we will offer it again today, and that is the Builders and Killers download, and this is by Dr. Jeff Williams. He was our guest last week, and it is 10 people that determine your destiny. Really, really good content, guys. You'll want to read over it and take notes from tonight, because listen, if you take the nuggets that we shared last week and you combine them with this week, honey, you're going somewhere. You are going somewhere. You're going somewhere real good. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to show you a picture of the website just so that you know what it looks like when you get there. Again, that is www.candicelambe.com, and you can sign up for that free download. Thank you again for joining me tonight, and we will see you next week.